Today, the mythology of capital gains. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to our latest post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian and New Zealand flavour. And today I'm joined again by property expert Joe Wilkes. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Martin.
How was your weekend?
Yeah, very good, very good. I was back up to Auckland end of last week and spent some time having a look at a few of these development sites that have been, much publicised. We've got this housing crisis, housing shortage, which the mainstream media have done a wonderful job of blowing up into an event that isn't real. I finally came across some Kiwi build units, which were unsold and empty. And we had a good drive around. We've got some stats and some data today to run through with people, because there are some quite worrying things, I suppose, starting to present themselves. And the Sproikers are out in force, trying to talk this credit bubble higher. But the evidence now is pointing to some fairly heavy drops in some areas. A bit to discuss today. We've got a couple of weeks since we last spoke, so yeah, sure we'll have some fun today.
Okay, sounds good. And it's interesting, we posted at the end of last week the drive around bit, right, which showed effectively more developments on more estates further out from Auckland again. And a few people in the comments said, well, that's all very well and good, but isn't that how building sites always look? You know, what else do you expect? And where are the stats? So let's try and tackle both of those in terms of discussion.
Yeah, well, we've got lots of stats now. From a building perspective, we've got there is no shortage of construction going on. We did our Auckland housing crisis posts at the sort of tail end of last year, and that construction is still going on all around the North Shore. The North Shore is presenting some fairly interesting statistics now, and there's lots of talk about, well, do we work on averages? Do we work on median prices? And the data is really hard to get some transparency on, and it's not being published in the press. But what we are now seeing is and I think this is the key, it's what they're doing in America with the Case-Shiller index, where they actually match pairs of houses. So you can see what a house has sold for previously, what it's sold for today. And we'll start, I think, if that's okay, with some numbers, which I have sent over to you so you can put them on the screen. But there's been some research done now on the North Shore, and we've got a number of matching pairs where that same house, and I'm presuming, that they won't have deteriorated in the short time that they've been owned. And if anything, they might have been improved. But we've got some really interesting figures coming out of the North Shore now. So matching pairs and houses. 53 Alexandra Avenue, Torbay, prior sale in March 2017 for 905,000. Recent sale April 19, 830,000. So you can see there's a loss there of 8.2% or 8.29%. That doesn't take into account the additional transaction costs, so the loss is greater than that. 20 Garadice Road, Rothesay Bay. 1.816 million in May 2016 has fallen, and recent sale in December of 18 was 1.637500, so a 9.83% fall from the last acquisition price. Really, 16 and 17 have been the peak of the bubble here. There are 6 others which, rather than me talk through, if you want to add them to the screen, you can see that we're seeing significant losses, and even people who bought last year are losing money. So the whole, I guess the greater fall theory is how you describe this in property. Is that there's been this misconception that if I buy something for £1 or $1 today, that it's going to be worth $1.20 when I sell it in a year's time. That myth is being blown up all over the place now. There are pockets of Auckland where we're seeing some significant drops in price.
And those areas, are they close in, or are they, I mean, I don't know Auckland that well, or are they sort of further out from
Yeah,
the centre of town?
the North Shore, you're looking at probably 25, 30 kilometres. This is around the areas that I filmed back in December, so the Hobsonville areas where there's been a
Okay.
lot of development. And what these second-hand houses are often doing is that they're coming back into the market having been bought from new 2 or 3 years ago, and they are now competing with the new stuff that is fresh, hasn't got any scuffs in the kitchen, hasn't got any issues with bathrooms that have seen a bit of wear and tear. So they are competing with some very nice new product. The only way that they sell is by being cheaper. And what I think is surprising is that how many people are now having to take these lower prices. The suggestion from homes.co.nz was 7.2% of sales in the first quarter of this year in Auckland were made at a loss. So people are, for whatever reason, they're having to sell these houses. Now, is that because we've got debt levels that rents don't meet up with, and people are taking weekly losses, the capital gains aren't there, and they can't stomach the weekly losses indefinitely? Or are we seeing just some stress on reduced incomes, maybe reduced ability to service the mortgages that people have taken on board if they're owner occupied? So yeah, it's quite interesting to I guess see the numbers in their stark reality.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I did a post over the weekend looking at Channel 9's news coverage of the property sector, because they interviewed me last week, and I said, don't buy now because prices will fall further. And they actually went through recent sale prices in Western Sydney, so that's about 40, 45 k's from the centre of Sydney, and they're seeing drops there. We're seeing 20% falls in places. But the same question is driving, well, why are people selling? And the answer is high levels of mortgage stress, high levels of debt, high levels of negative equity. So people are now being forced to sell. And this is the thing I think people need to get their head around, that the old myth that property prices can only go up, and for a generation, people have always claimed that here in Australia and probably in New Zealand too, is just not proved by the reality at the moment.
No, well, the Sproikers are out, as I said earlier, and the whole thing about New Zealand is this narrative of house prices will double every 7 to 12 years, and we go through a cycle. And there's a lot of this now being publicised in the press and by some of the main portals. Not all of them, but there are a couple that I think are backed by the banks, and their spokespeople are talking about this doubling. Big celebrations as well recently because of the removal of the suggestion that we're going to have a capital gains tax. Well, I like to think I had some part to play in this, Martin, and I'm not going to take full responsibility, but Jacinda Ardern is on my LinkedIn feed, and I'm guessing that she might have seen a few DFA posts, or I hope she has. She hasn't responded. She doesn't answer my questions, but her suburb in Mount Albert, where she bought a house at the end of 2017 for I guess top of market price, has seen a median price decline in excess of 30%. So I don't know whether that's influencing her view on capital gains, or whether it's just a case of, well, if we have a capital gains tax in an environment where credit's easing and prices are falling, the risks to the government are that you end up having to pay people back on their capital losses, whereas by not having the capital gains tax, you remove that from it being an issue.
Well, of course, if prices continue to fall, then people are making losses, and well, that's how the system works. So interesting. So capital gains is off the table.
Yep, off the table for the term that Jacinda Ardern is in power, and if New Zealand, we looked at the fundamentals of New Zealand versus Ireland back in 2006-07, and compared our building rates and various things that we've seen with our credit expansion. We may not see capital gains for a decade, and we could be starting from a much lower base before they recover.
Yeah, and this is what I've been saying, that people are still talking about, well, a minor adjustment to prices, but there'll be a significant bounce back, in the next 6 months, or they always say in the next 6 months. It's funny how that 6 months keeps moving out. But the fact of the matter is, there's no reason why we wouldn't see prices continue to slide for 2, 3, 4 years. And if you look at Ireland, if you look at the UK and elsewhere, this could be a decade where effectively prices do not expand. and that would be a remarkably different environment for, compared with a decade ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much building work going on. The central parts of Auckland, the large developments of apartments with cranes up, and a lot of these are going to hit the market over the next year or two. Still, it's all, we've got a housing shortage, but there is going to be a huge amount of city centre apartments. I went to visit one site just because I had a few minutes spare, and I popped in to see a development called the Cab, which is central Auckland, sort of down at the end of Queen Street. And they've got an old building which I think was previously offices, which there's planning permission to convert into luxury apartments, and they've been trying to sell these things for a couple of years now. There are, I would say, about 20% of the units that have been agreed. So deposits have been taken, and I presume a price has been set. Now, 2 years on from when this began, there's still no evidence of any work being undertaken. So there's no finance to back up this development schedule until more of these units are sold. Now, if I were a purchaser of one of these units, given that there's some really, really nice new stuff that's being constructed in buildings that aren't conversions, and office buildings, they always have little issues like, does the plumbing in the old building satisfy the new requirements for extra kitchens, extra bathrooms? Seen a lot of these in the UK, and they're not easy. They're not easy to convert compared to the building of a brand new purpose-built luxury block of apartments. So we've got some issues there, and there will be people who've put deposits down, and it's whether or not they've thought far enough ahead to say, well, I need to have a long stop on. If they're not going to start building this for another 2 or 3 years, at what point do I say, well, I'm not going to buy, and can I have my deposit back? Because everything else is getting cheaper.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Well, we have in Australia something called a deposit bond, which means that essentially you pay a premium to an insurance company and they effectively guarantee the deposit, right? So It means you don't have to pay any physical money now. You just basically do that. But what's now interesting about that is that when it comes to push comes to shove and people then think, well, okay, now prices have dropped, from the peak when I committed, they're now trying to get out of some of these things. So the whole question of those on extended contract terms and those who committed at the peak and are now seeing prices 20% down, and how do they get out, is becoming quite a significant issue here.
Yeah, and it's going to be a significant issue here as well. Returning to things that we touched on earlier, but the median house price falls, and just to run through some of these because they're quite dramatic. Medians were used consistently by the Spruikers on the way up. They seem to be out of favour now, but we are starting to see some news articles in the mainstream press. So Stuff had published an article last week about falling medians in suburbs, and the Herald. They took a different spin. They worked on the 1 or 2 suburbs that had gone up quite dramatically, and then buried the bad ones lower down in the article. I don't make too much of a deal of those. But yeah, so if you look at central Auckland suburbs, and this is what's happened, and these are Real Estate Institute New Zealand numbers. They've only worked on the suburbs where there were a significant number of transactions. So any suburb where there are only a handful of transactions over a 6-month period, they've not included. But Mount Albert, Jacinda Ardern's constituency, and where she's now living, their median fell from 1.17 million last year to 805,250 this year. Royal Oak had the next biggest drop, median of 1.16 in 2018 to a median sales price of 865,000 this year, 25.4% drop. Long Bay, median prices down 24.8%. Westmere down 22.5%. Comarama 21% down. Parnell 20.8% down. Albany 20.5% down. Mount Eden 20.1% down. Herne Bay 17.2% down. Freeman's Bay 17% down. Some of these are very nice areas. Comarama, Parnell, Mount Eden, Herne Bay. They're pretty top end locations. So this quite steep fall very, very quickly How much of it is due to the removal of the foreign buyer and that liquidity that we talked about as being essential for the flow of funds to other areas? And at what point will people look at how cheap some of these very nice areas are becoming and completely dismiss all the new developments that are 30 kilometres away from the city centre, and really don't offer much by way of amenity for lifestyle, shops, schools, community. So my drive around the area south of Auckland this weekend, and I went to Pukekohe, which is where they've got some Kiwi built developments happening. There were dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of empty homes that have been completed, dozens and dozens of others under construction. I had a little concern, a little fear at one point that if anybody went to a music concert or an outdoor festival in Auckland, they might have to go for peas in bushes because there's so many portaloos up that I don't know if we've got any left that aren't already on a building site in the country. So it's going to start taking its toll, and buyers they've got more choice than they've had in a long time. March sales volumes were just around 2,000 for Auckland and surrounds, and that is well off the 3,000 that we saw at the height of the transactional volume in March 2015. So less is selling, certain areas are becoming much cheaper, and really nice areas seem to be becoming much cheaper, and there will be a choice for buyers to say, well, hang on a minute, I might just wait, improve my lifestyle by buying something in a better area, than settle for what you do in that rising bubble when you're worried that you're never going to find anything and you miss out all the time. Places that are miles away.
Yeah, and it's worth saying, I think, Joe, that there are no such things as bargains in a falling market. Right? They are cheaper, but you have no idea whether it's actually a bargain or not, because if prices continue to fall, what may appear a bargain at one point in time, 3 months later, can look overpriced again. So one of the things I keep saying to people is there's no hurry. If you are thinking of buying, then wait, because you'll be able to buy closer in, you'll be able to buy in better areas, and you'll be able to pay less. So, don't believe that just because prices have dropped 10% or 15 or 20%, that means that they're now suddenly really good value. And it goes back to the question of how do you calculate the fundamental value of a property? Because if you just use the standard approach of sort of, supplier but demand, market negotiation, that doesn't work really well in a falling market, because essentially tomorrow the price will fall further. You need to come back to a more fundamental approach to valuation, which is more to do with, well, what would the place cost if you started to build it, buy the plot, add the property on the lands, etc., etc. And if you do it bottom up, my suspicion is that in those areas of Auckland, prices would still be well overpriced.
Yeah, well, we've seen it with the land prices. The land prices on some of these peripheral subdivisions are phenomenal. Pukekohe and where we were at the weekend, you've got plot prices of around $400,000. Now, I don't want to take the piss too much, but these are bubble prices. This is speculation, because $400,000 is about, give or take, it's about £210,000. The average house price in the UK is £227,000. So you get a house for that sort of money as well. Now, New Zealand's lovely. The UK's got lots of things going for it, but these prices are just so far out of line of the reality of incomes, and it is because people are still being allowed to borrow 6, 7, 8, 9 times multiples of income. They're being able to borrow interest-only terms. 28% of all mortgages last year were on interest only. And this has inflated something that, with that hype of it, always goes up. I mean, some of those North Shore numbers, they have been bought. They don't work as an investment. The rents were never going to cover a repayment term over 30 years. People have been subsidising it through negative gearing, whatever else, but by a lot. And I wouldn't be surprised if many have actually been topping up beyond that. And 2 years down the line, when you look at it and you think, well, okay, I might have to switch to a repayment term on the mortgage, or the bank's getting a bit tighter. We know now that the banks are lending around 20% less than they were 18 months ago. So that whole ability has just evaporated. If the whole market was funded with debt, then 20% less borrowing ability for the reducing pool of first-time buyers, because there really aren't as many as there were when credit was easier.
Yep, absolutely. So the old message is buyer beware.
Buyer be very ware.
Joe, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Cheers, Martin.
So it looks as though areas of New Zealand are now mirroring areas of Australia with continued home price falls. And unfortunately, it's my expectation that prices will continue to fall for some time yet. So buyers should definitely beware. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next time.